Good news everyone, after a year of hiatus due to adverse industry conditions, our previously untitled movie Money in the Bank is now back in production, and lo and behold, I now have a construction manager breathing down my neck, waiting to get started on the production of the set. And I'm also getting in the neck from the producers, because without a full set of drawings, it's very difficult to nail down how much this thing's going to cost. And as the finances are getting quite antsy about this investment, budget is tight. So in this video, we're going to take the model of our vault set that we made previously in SketchUp and make a set of construction drawings out of it that can be sent to the workshop and built into reality. To do this as efficiently as possible and to allow for last-minute edits, we're going to be using my CAD software of choice, Vectorworks. And to get people up to speed on using Vectorworks, here are some navigation tips before we get started. We covered the basics of navigating in 2 dimensions in a previous video, but here's a quick recap. You can pan the camera up, down, left and right by holding down on the scroll wheel. Also, you can zoom in and out by scrolling up and down on the wheel. All your snapping options are right here. This allows you to decide whether you want to snap to distances, angles, objects, or smart points, or combinations of those items. You can flip between all your layers up here in the drop-down menu. It's best to think of all your layers as drawing sheets and modelling spaces. So we use design layers to model and draw up items at full scale, and then we use viewports of those onto the sheet layers to create our scale drawings. It's also important to type in your coordinates into this pop-out field here whenever you're moving or drawing something. You don't need to do this if you want to work with any level of accuracy. For instance, if I want to draw a 1 meter square, I want to click where I want to start that shape, move the mouse in the direction I want to draw it, then I type in 1000, tab, and then 1000 to enter the width, and then enter. And this will give me my 1 meter square. Also, make sure you set your units to millimeters with a precision of 1. This allows you to draw a model as accurately as you ever really need to do when you're doing set design, whilst also working quite quickly. Imperial holdouts are welcome to stick to feet and inches, but in my experience it's a lot easier to type in 1000 than it is 3'3" 3/8. Hey, I don't make the rules, do what you want. Also, Vectorworks top tip, you can type in mathematical functions into the field too. So if I need to line up 8 flats that measure 1220 wide, I can type in 1220 times 8 and it'll work the maths out. This also works with the other Ed Sheeran albums too. So, navigating in 3D. Panning and zooming are the same, with the scroll wheel proving very useful for that. However, if you want to orbit the camera around your model, you'll need to hold the control button and the scroll wheel at the same time. There are a bunch of standard views up here in the drop-down menu, and also in the context menu if you tap space anywhere in the viewport. You can also flip between perspective and orthogonal views up here in this drop-down here. And this drop-down allows you to flick between the different view types, all the way from wireframe, through to hidden line, through to shaded, through to final renders. I'd generally stick to shaded or wireframe for now. Bonus tip, you can also hold down the B key to activate this little X-ray mode. This is very handy for finding things that you may have lost within the space. Working planes. This is often something that catches people out when learning to use 3D tools in Vectorworks. Unlike SketchUp, which generally lets you draw things whichever way you like, Vectorworks is a little bit more traditional in that it uses a drawing plane system. You can find the tools for flicking between these different options up here in the drop-down menu, and you can set it to automatic, which makes it a lot easier to use. Anyway, I think that gets us up to speed, so let's go and look at our model. So we're going to import our SketchUp model into Vectorworks using the native import SketchUp function. This is a relatively recent addition to Vectorworks, which allows you to import the models and keep all your tags, geometry, groups, components, and textures. Just to clarify, in Vectorworks, your tags are called classes. Your materials will be stored as RenderWorks textures, and components are called symbols. Other than the name changes, they all seem to work the same. So we're going to click on Import, SketchUp, and then we're going to look and find our model, and then we're going to click Import, just making sure that the scale settings are correct, and then we click OK, and then we have our model, and everything appears to be correct. Just make sure that whatever you import, that you check the scale, often using either the line tool or something. You may need to re-import it if it's come in wrong. So traditionally we would draw our plans and elevations to scale using the 2-dimensional tools. This is not far from the method we used in the last video to do our stage plan. But in this video we're going to focus on the 3-dimensional model and using the cross-section tools to generate our elevations. This method may take a little while to get your head around, but trust me, in the long run you will save a lot of time using it. This method is not a million miles away from BIM, Building Information Modelling.
Oh no, I've written BIM.
I got it!
I'm BIM.
Hi!
Which is an architectural technique in which one main model is made of a building. Then that model is used to extract all the information to generate the technical drawings for the construction process.
Guess what?
What?
Anyway, this being a film set and not a multi-million-pound housing development, I'm pretty sure our requirements are a lot simpler than those of an architecture firm. But it's nice to know the parallels. Anyway, drawings. So much like the stage plan, I've opted for an A1 sheet. I use A1 generally because it's large enough to fit a lot of information on it without being too large to be practical. Also, it scales directly down to A3, which means that if someone's in a pinch and they need to print it off in an office printer, they can do that and still work to scale. Keep in mind that workshops are often busy, cluttered spaces, and there's not always a nice empty worktop that you can roll out a massive sheet of paper. So next we're going to paste in our border and title block from our previous stage plan. For those of you who haven't seen the stage plan video yet, this is made simply just using the rectangle line tools and also some text. We've kept the details fairly simple because it's not a large production. On larger productions, you'll often have much more information in this title block. However, we've kept it fairly minimal with the movie title, production designer's name, the set title, drawing title, scale, the location or stage, name of who's drawn it, the date, and the drawing number. So even on a fairly simple title block, you've got 9 pieces of information there. So we've got our sheet laid out with the title block and border, and we've also got our model imported into the design layer. So let's start generating our drawings. So if we just click to plan view, all we can really see is the tops of the walls. So if we just create a viewport from this viewpoint, all we'd end up with is the view of the top of the walls and no information as to where the doors are, which is not much use when you're making a plan. The reason is when you're making a generic viewport using Vectorworks, all it's really going to do is give you the view of the outside of that item. Now sets are often seen from the inside, so this is a problem. So what we're going to do about that? We're going to create a cross section that actually cuts downwards through the whole set at our desired height. This will generally let you know where any features such as doors, windows, or vault door openings might be. In his book, Drawing the Line, David McHenry describes plans as an imaginary slice that cuts across the set at about 1 metre or 3 foot above the floor. So we're going to take this advice quite literally and we're going to put a section cut across the whole set that allows us to see in plan view where the doors are. And yes, this also applies to windows too. Sadly, we haven't got any in this design for this set because I didn't envision making multiple videos on it. So first what we want to do when we're making this section is we want to check the widest point of the vault opening. We want to check the height of that from the ground. And the reason we're going to do that is because that's going to be where we place our cross section. I just feel that's the most logical place for it because then we'll get the maximum width of that aperture in the plan. So we'll ping a line from this point to the ground and we'll take note of that height and it'll be useful in a minute. So we click plan view, so we're looking down on our model in orthogonal mode, and then we click create horizontal section viewport. What this allows us to do is set the height at which our cross section is cutting through our set. So we type in the height of the widest point of our vault door, which we just took a note of, and then we leave all the other values as infinite. After setting our desired scale and drawing titles and so on, we click OK, and then we're back on our sheet layer and we have a section plan. Hey! Now, if you've chosen a scale that doesn't quite work or you're not happy with the annotations you've made initially, that's fine. You can always change them over here in the info palette along with any other properties. So we've got a plan, or the makings of one at least, and the next thing we need to do is get some elevations on the sheet, or sections as they're often called. And the way we're going to do this is very similar to the plan, but even simpler. So to generate a section viewport, you want to go to View, Create Section Viewport, and then that immediately opens up the tool, and you want to click and draw a line across where you want your section to cut across. And then you want to hover the mouse in the direction you want your section viewport to face, and then you double click to create that viewport. We are greeted with a very similar dialog box as before, so we select our scale, give it a title, I'm calling this one section AA, and click OK. And we have our elevation, and the fun part is it automatically puts the section markers on your plan as well. So we're going to repeat that process with every section/elevation you would like to create. With a 3-walled open fronted set like this, I'll generally label my walls from left to right, A, B, C, and so on. And then any additional sections showing these middle walls after that. Okay, so we've got our plan and we've got our elevations. We want to lay them out in a way that looks nice on page, reads well, and allows space for notes. So we're going to take our plan, we're going to send it over to the left side of the page, and we're going to orientate it in a way that makes the most sense for the scene. So we are looking up and into the vault here. And next we're going to line up all of our elevations nice and evenly spaced across the other half of the page in a way that allows for space around each one so that we can have dimensions and notes and annotations. Making it look nice. So we've got our page laid out quite nicely, but it's just not looking very nice. There's lots of lines everywhere, you're not quite sure what means what. So what we're going to do is make it look a little bit nicer by selecting all of our elevations and then clicking the background render drop down and select shaded. So then we're going to go into the background render settings and we're going to deselect textures and colors and turn on shadows. This gives a nice kind of like shaded look. Yeah, it's up to you. You can go into the Renderworks styles if you really like. They can be really nice, but they can often cost you a lot of valuable time re-updating the images, having to re-render them every time. So I find the shaded option just works well enough for what we need to do while allowing you to work quickly. I also find it has quite a nice way of outlining things that looks quite aesthetically pleasing too. Finishing off the drawing in 2D. That's right, we've used the 3D method to make our drawings so far, but there are going to be some things we do need to use the two-dimensional tools for. So a few things I like to do to kind of make my drawings read a bit nicely is make a ground line underneath each of my elevations, and then I put a little shadow underneath that. So I simply do that by drawing a long, thick line underneath each of my elevations, setting it to something quite thick like 35 or 0.35, and I then draw a very light grey rectangle underneath, almost as a shadow line. This just helps read very immediately where our set is sat on the ground. One of the things that's not really working is our doors are solidly in the drawing, which means that we still don't have door openings, even though we gave ourselves a horizontal cut plane. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into the 3D model. In the design layer, we're going to select our doors that we want to not be showing on the plan, and we are going to give them their own class, just simply called doors. And then what we do is we go back into the sheet layer, select the plan viewport, and we go to the class options and we disable the doors. We're also going to make sure that on the elevations our door class is definitely visible. Sometimes when you make a new class, automatically it will be turned off in your existing viewport. So just make sure that that's visible where you want it to be. This way they don't show up on the plan, but they do show up on the elevation. And the other thing about doors, which you may already know, is you want an arc to show where the doors open. So we're going to manually draw those in using the arc tool. Make sure that anything like this you're drawing on your annotations group for that particular viewport. So you want to do that by double clicking on your viewport. Make sure annotations is selected, click OK, and then it's here where you want to draw anything like arcs for doors, as well as dimensions and notes. Just remember that you have different options for the arc tool, so learn which ones do which. The different options for the arc tool are up here. You can have a little play and just see how the different ones work. We're going to use the center point arc for drawing our door. Make sure when drawing door arcs that you're opening them the correct way. It's important because obviously that's going to be what gets built, so make sure that your door arcs that are showing where the door is going to open match up with what you had in mind when making the set model in the first place. What we're also going to do to avoid confusion, we're going to take the access flats that we had opened in the model, which is going to place them back into a closed position. And we're going to add a dotted arc, much like the doors in the plan, to show the opening. Something else we're going to do is fill in these cross sections of wall here that don't seem to register as solids. So you can see it's just white rather than black, how it should be. I'm going to cheat here and just draw over them with the polygon tool and fill them with black. Also, we'll hide this table, which is confusing to us, in the elevation here. We're going to put it in a new class called Plan Only and turn it off in the elevations. Adding dimensions. So to do this, we're going to use the Constrained Dimension tool, which is also N on the keyboard. We also want to make sure that all of our dimensions are going to be the right color. So we find the dimension class here, we right click on dimensions, we click edit. Here we can select what color we want our dimensions to be when we draw them. Don't forget to check use at creation. This way, whenever you draw a new dimension, it'll be the color and style you want it to be. And then you want to go into your viewports, open into the annotations group, and start adding your dimensions. These should automatically clip onto parts of your model. Sometimes they don't, which is really annoying, so you might need to type them in manually as you go. If you hover over, find out roughly how big it needs to be and then just lock it to the correct dimension. You've got to make sure that you include the widths of the doors as well as the distances of the doors between doors, windows, pilasters, any features in the wall. You want to make sure that you have the width and the height of each item as well as the distance between each of those items. Be sure to mark the height of the wood paneling as well, or anything like that. Try keeping all your dimensions outside of any particular drawing so you're not covering up any visual details. So the majority of your dimensions and details are actually going to be on the elevations rather than the plan. The reason for this is sections of set tend to be built as flats in a workshop, so it makes more sense to have all the information on each elevation. But do remember to put some overall dimensions on the plan too. This helps correlate between the two items, but just make sure they line up. So I'm going to use the architectural standard for my dimensions, and also I'm going to set the text offset to 0 so that the dimension is on the dimension line. This way I'm maximising the amount of space I can use on the page. One thing I hadn't noticed while switching the plan to shaded is that it hides the section markers. I couldn't find a way to get them back in shaded mode, so I switched it back to hidden line mode and just filled any of the bits that needed filling in the polygon tool like earlier. Something I also wanted to change was in this elevation here, you're seeing through to the back of the vault. This is a little bit confusing to read, so what I'm going to do is set it so that cross section actually has a maximum depth that it will show, you know, so you can see what's in the foreground, it will just cut off what's beyond that cross section. So I'm going to do this by going to Advanced Properties and setting the extents beyond the cut plane to finite depth. Then I type in a distance that I think is going to be between the vault wall and the back of the vault, and hopefully it'll land there and just cut out the detail that I don't want in that elevation. So we'll click update and we'll see how that turned out. Perfect! Adding annotations. As well as knowing the dimensions, your build team are going to want to know other details about what they're building. So we're talking about mouldings and we're talking about door types and that kind of exciting stuff. So to do this, we're going to use the callout tool. Remember to make a note of each type of moulding that's used, that's quite handy to know. I tend to use codes off of the Mansfield timber chart. It's a popular timber merchant in the film and TV industry, and usually if you use one of those codes, most construction managers are going to know what you're on about. So we're going to cheat a little bit here, and we're going to put big rectangles around the vault door and the steel gate behind it. These are quite complex things, they're going to need their own detail drawings. So we're going to put a note here saying detail to follow. We might cover this in a future video. Any lighting fixtures will need annotating with practical lighting fixture. This way we know that it needs wiring up and lighting up on set. We also want to make it doubly clear that we have access at the rear end of the set via these access doors. Make it as clear as humanly possible. The amount of times I've had access doors built into sets and they just get completely ignored and then equipment lumped in front of it is depressing. I'm also going to note that all the safety deposit boxes need to be practical. This is a big looting scene, so we're going to have people going in and emptying all the stuff out, and therefore the doors need to open, there needs to be an opening inside. This will have its effect on the cost of the build, so it's important to make that clear as early as possible. Finishing touches. So we now have a full set of plans and elevations, all annotated with dimensions and notes. This is fantastic news. And now what we need to do is add a large title across the top. Make sure that this is in line with what's written in the title block. And we're also going to make a note of the scale under the title here to make it extra obvious. We're also going to add a scale bar using this scale bar tool. Now, there's a few tricks to using this scale bar tool if you're not used to it at first. You want to click on the scale bar tool, go into the options up here, and basically what it's going to ask you is how many numbers of minor measurements you'd like and how many numbers of major measurements you'd like. What I like to do usually is I tend to have minor dimensions of 250 mil and maybe do 1 or 2 meters of those, so that's quarter meters, and then it steps up to full meters for the rest of the scale. This is just so people who are reading the drawings, if they want to check the scale on a printout, they can use their scale rule and just make sure that it's all in order. I want to do all this inside the annotations group for the plan, just to make sure that it's the same scale as the plan drawing. So there we go, we've got a full-ish set of drawings for this set. This is enough to start sending off to construction managers to get some prices in and to get them started on the construction process. Admittedly, we haven't done the details for the vault door yet. We might revisit that in a later video. But using this workflow, what we have managed to do is take a model from the concept stage and bring it through to the point where we've got a set of workable drawings that could be built into a set. Now, there are some issues with this workflow. It's not the most efficient workflow in the world. I can hear some of the Vectorworks diehards out there going, why didn't you model this in Vectorworks in the first place? And the reason for that is as follows, really. The whole point of doing this exercise was to give quite a realistic expectation of what working in film and TV is like. And in the real film business, it's very common for a set to start out as a concept model, usually done by a concept artist, either blocked out in SketchUp or Cinema 4D or Blender even. Then that will be rendered or painted over into a piece of concept art, whether that's done in 3D using rendering software, or whether that's done using digital painting techniques in software such as Procreate. Sometimes there's a mixture of both. But then once the design has been signed off by the production designer, the director, the producer, the executive producer, and head honchos up at the studio, and whatever other links in the chain there may be, that's when that model will be handed over to the art director and then imported into their CAD software and turned into construction drawings. In reality, they often end up having to remodel it to real-world scales, but there's often some kind of method a bit like this going on major productions. Well, that's on bigger productions, but when I'm also working on smaller things such as commercials, I still go SketchUp first. The reason being I find it better for texturing and making visuals from, especially when I'm using rendering software such as Indigo, or even putting things into Unreal Engine to make some animatics. And I generally find it quicker in SketchUp to get to a point with a visual where it looks sexy enough to get it across the line with the client, which will often get our design signed off and underway. That's when I'll take it into Vectorworks and make the actual drawings. I will admit that you will end up remodeling items in Vectorworks sometimes to make them easily editable, because even though you can import models straight into Vectorworks now, which is really cool, editing those meshes can still be quite painful. However, we will be covering more 3D modeling techniques in Vectorworks in future videos, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But nonetheless, I'm very happy with what we've achieved today. We've got a full set of drawings that you can send off to a construction manager. If you'd like a closer look, you can download the PDF in the link in the description below. And there's also a link for downloading the actual Vectorworks working file for this if you want to see how I've laid out the file. So I do hope that you found this useful. If so, please leave a like and consider subscribing. If you have any feedback or questions, do please leave a comment. And if you found this really useful, you'd like to buy me a coffee, there's another link in the description to the donation page on my website. Thank you for watching right till the end. I hope to see you again soon on the Set Design channel. Goodbye.